Okay, whoa, hey everybody. I might just get started because we have a short period of time. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming. I'm Christina, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of VR Playhouse. We are a virtual reality creative content studio and full-service production company. And this is my husband and co-founder, Ian Forrester, who is the Chief Creative Officer of VR Playhouse. So today we are talking about virtual reality, how fantasy becomes form. And the idea behind, fantasy becoming form is that, in VR we have this big conception of what we want it to do and how it has the ability to change human consciousness and change entertainment. And we have these grand visions, but to meet that, we have to do a lot of hard practical work. And so I think a lot of what the last 2 years has been, at least for us, has been about bringing that fantasy into form and what that means. So in today's talk, we're going to blow through a lot of stuff in 20 minutes, but I'm going to talk about the last 2 years at VR Playhouse and how, sort of without realizing really what we were getting into, we just dove headfirst into making a creative content studio that specializes in VR and sort of what that progression has been like. I'm going to talk about a couple of projects that we were very excited to work on, and then Ian's going to talk about why we did this in the first place. So to begin with, if you had told me 3 years ago that Ian and I would be running a high-tech creative studio that focuses on virtual reality, I would have been very surprised. I was a documentary filmmaker and journalist. Ian was running an immersive theater company. And at the time, we were both looking at new ways to do what we were doing. I was looking at telling real stories through new media, and he was starting to do what he calls theater without seats, which was site-specific theater. I think at the time we both knew that there was something happening, and there was some changes were afoot, but we didn't really know what that meant yet. And it was in January of 2014 that we discovered the DK1 at Sundance New Frontiers, and both fell in love with it immediately and decided to go all in. So, early days, AKA year negative one in VR, otherwise known as 2014. So we started with what I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is the VR Content Maker's Beginner Kit. It involves GoPros, multiple versions of GoPros, whether that's 6, whether that's 10, shooting simultaneously in all directions. And we began to shoot whatever we could. We decided to take all of our equipment to Nicaragua in November of 2014, because what better place to experiment with 360 video than in a country where there are no rules and you can do whatever you want. So we took our team down there and we shot a ton of 360 video, some of which was watchable, some of which was not. We had to learn that the hard way when we came back. Coming back, we then stumbled into what the next thing that you encounter when you're a beginner in 360 video and VR, which is post-production. It wasn't long till we discovered that our Macs that we had been doing all of our video editing on up until that point couldn't hang. Exporting files was impossible, and so we realized pretty quickly we needed to be moving to PC, and Ian and a team of intrepid volunteers helped to build what we called our Monster, which was our first PC, high-powered PC. We went to Oculus in January of 2015, hulking this monster with us into the Facebook place, and it was just hilarious and amazing. And we also quickly learned that in addition to needing high-powered PCs, you needed software. We bought, Colors Auto Pano. We bought, we moved into After Effects, all of the beginner's toolkit, and again started building getting hard drives, as many hard drives as we possibly could. You'll find as you start going into making this kind of content that at some point it's like you either are in or you're not, and it just continually the gear that you need just continues to sort of grow and progress. We ended up moving into a converted liquor store because eventually we had been operating out of our house, hence the Playhouse. We had computers in every room linked together by networks that snaked out of the windows of our house. And eventually you couldn't move anywhere inside our 2-story house without hearing the buzz of computers, and we decided that it was time to move. And so a little over a year ago, we moved into a converted liquor store. We took the coolers that once housed beer and wine, and we made them our server room. And we started continually buying things like servers and all of the hard drives and building workstations. It's important to note, I think, that VR Playhouse is one of, I think, the few creative content studios of its size and abilities that's completely self-funded. We did this entire thing without any outside capital, and that meant we built it with jobs. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, we built it with jobs in the year before headsets and in the very, very early days of 360 mobile. And I will tell you that having contracts with clients is a great way to make sure that you just figure it out. You know, there's kind of no turning back once you have that signed contract. And so we did 15 projects last year, most of which were paying jobs. And that was how we built our studio, which now has a core team of, depending on the day, between 10 to 15 people, 10 workstations. How big is the render farm? 80 machine render farm. I'm not gonna lie, like there are certain days when we wake up and I'm just like, this is completely insane. Like I could have never anticipated when we bought that first 360 Hero rig that we would eventually have this enormous render farm. But if you are interested in turning like your fantasies into form, these are the kinds of things that you need to have to be able to execute. You know, eventually we moved beyond 360 video into also increasingly animation, game engine interaction, because that is also sort of where we're seeing the cutting edge of VR moving. So, what do I have here? I'm not sure that my videos here are working, which is okay. We can just move without them. Oh, no, there we go. Yeah, but they can't hear it. No sound. Okay. Oh, yeah, cool. Hopefully that works. Okay. So yeah, I'll just back up a little. Yeah. Is it the CERN? Okay, so what we have here is a project from last year that I thought was one that probably of all of our commercial paying jobs, the one that we thought we were the most excited about. It was a collaboration between VR Playhouse and this company in New York called Missing Pieces. It was for Honda, and it involved it's a music video with an artist named Moses Sumney who loops tracks, and every time he loops one of inside his song, he duplicates himself inside the 360 video. So by the end, you're completely surrounded by Moses Sumneys, and what I'm going to show you is not the video, but instead the case studies. So you can start to see like how we built that in our. So you can see, it's like in some ways a simple concept, but then when you try to execute it, it takes a ton of time, a lot of really skilled technicians. The next thing the next attempt to make something exciting for VR was an original piece that we did called The Surrogate. And The Surrogate was a blend of 360 video, CGI, and was interactive. So I'm going to show you that trailer too.
The Surrogate is a narrative virtual reality experience that melts 360 video and a computer-generated experimental environment using an innovative technique called immersive hemispheres. When the viewer puts on the VR headset, they are immersed in the consciousness of a female protagonist whose point of view they control as they explore.
Yeah, I could be just actually narrating this over the video, but since I was the original narrator anyway. So as you can see, you control where you look by navigating these hallways, and at the end of each hallway is a portal where you can stick your head in, and inside of that portal, a 360 video plays inside a house. And so that was kind of interesting. It gave us an opportunity to test sort of a framework for storytelling inside VR, which is still in some ways a very unexplored territory. So I guess that was a very rushed thing, but the point is, you know, this stuff is challenging to make, and there's sort of a gap right now between what we can imagine and what we can execute. And I'm going to, and hopefully, you know, we're going to be working at making that gap smaller in the next couple years. But I'm going to pass it to Ian, and he's going to talk about why we do this in the first place.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm Chief Creative Officer for VR Playhouse and co-founder. So I'm going to take a little bit of a departure from the more practical sort of day-to-day aspects of it and talk about more the kind of the philosophical underpinnings and implications of this new thing that we're all here celebrating and getting excited about. So in the next probably 10 minutes, I'm going to posit that we all live in a giant simulation, that our tools for measuring reality and determining our own survival are wildly skewed to the point of being broken, that we make all kinds of choices that affect each other's fundamental identities and lives based on these faulty measurements, and as a result, as a result of acting on each other on the basis of bad information, we act as limiting forces on each other's survival. I'm also going to posit that using VR, we can begin to parse out more accurate information about ourselves and the world around us, use that information to develop new strategies that allow us to act as enablers for each other's survival as opposed to limiters, and do so at a rapidly developed global scale. So my thesis here is that VR offers us a new level of simulated reality as opposed to this one that we're all in right now, in which we can explore and discover new truths about perception and identity, that the lessons we learn inside the headset we can then bring out and apply to our corporeal reality, this one, on a really sort of massive, rapidly evolving scale to affect real positive change on a systemic level. So there's already a body of work out there that suggests that we live inside an elaborate simulation. From the research of astrophysicist George Smoot, whose argument in favor of our reality being situated inside a simulation relies on sound statistical probability, to the recently profiled work of Donald Hoffman, who has spent the last 3 decades studying sensory perception and how we fundamentally distort the objective information presented to us by our surroundings. It's actually a really great article in The Atlantic, just published on, I think, Monday. So Smoot's argument, which he makes in far greater detail in his TEDx talk, which is available on YouTube, boils down to a few salient points. So the points are that one of these things is true. Either we live in a universe in which simulations are not possible, we live in a universe in which simulations are possible and we do not live inside a simulation, or we live in a universe in which simulations are possible and we are a simulation. So a fundamental underpinning of Smoot's argument is that human perception is notoriously bad at determining objective observations of reality, and we know this through physics. Lately, we've discovered contradictions in physics, quantum physics, and he asks that this could be evidence that we all live inside a larger simulation. So the statistical probability there is that, we know we live in a universe in which simulations are possible because we make them. And if simulations are possible, then there is a far greater number of simulations than actual worlds. And so, if we are the only real, true, objective reality, then, we're kind of a little bit egotistical about that. It's just not statistically probable. A fundamental discovery of quantum physics is that in quantum systems, there is no such thing as objective observer-independent existence. Rather than existing and waiting to be discovered, objects are created and localized in space as they are observed, much the same way, anybody who's worked with a game engine knows that, in game engines, they render the environments according to where someone looks while they're turning their head, right? It's not all like sort of there waiting to be discovered. It's created as you move through it. So, quantum physics says that our reality exists in fundamentally the same way. So this is the sort of the seminal experiment of quantum physics. So anyone wanting background on this, I invite you to look up this experiment. It's called the double slit experiment, in which a single photon can be proven to show evidence of taking 2 separate paths at the same time when fired unobserved. So this is the contradiction that Smoot's referencing when he says, hey, maybe we all live inside a giant simulation. And so this is where I'm going to pick up with the work of Hoffman. And like, by the way, all of this is heavily cribbed from sources that I'll make available to you guys afterwards. So in his recently published article in The Atlantic, Hoffman argues that the world according to our senses is in fact a simulation created for us by our brains from the raw data that actually doesn't resemble what our senses perceive. And that this, this kind of sensory interpretation could be considered a kind of virtual reality that we create for ourselves on a moment-to-moment basis. Advances in machine vision and have helped us to confirm this. If you look at raw data captured from a LiDAR scanner or from from a camera that's sort of unfiltered with a LUT, like you can't actually see anything until you start processing it down and limiting the data that's there for yourself. Anyone working in VR, the parallels between this and working in a game engine where you're calling DLL files and architecture and all these other things and sort of putting it all together in a way that's limiting what you're seeing, for aesthetics and information. I don't think those parallels are lost in this room. So according to Hoffman, we evolved this way to limit reality because survival and evolutionary fitness are not necessarily enhanced by having an accurate perception of the world, so much as it is enhanced by being able to perceive threats and resources. So, quoting him, an organism that sees reality as it is will never be more fit than an organism of equal complexity that sees none of reality but is just tuned to fitness. So, the example, he gives an example about water. If the fitness function of perceiving water were linear, right, meaning that the more accurately you could perceive water, the greater your survival and fitness were enhanced. If it was a one-to-one like that, then it would benefit you to be able to, see or perceive as much water as was there. The organism that sees the truth about water wins, right? However, fitness functions don't really operate in a linear fashion. They're much more likely to operate on a bell curve. So the organism really only needs to be tuned to find a certain quantity of water and only in a way that it can incorporate. So if it only perceives water once it's above a certain concentration, then it doesn't matter if it's seeing the truth about all water. This kind of filtering is actually really advantageous to its survival because it allows it to only see the water that will assist in its fitness, right? So this kind of filtering is going on all the time and through our sensory inputs. It's happening right now, I'm sure of it. Like 5 of these words are hitting your guys' brain and then you're thinking about something else and whatever. And so like all of this filtering is going on through our sensory inputs and through that we're all creating each our own simulation of the reality that we all exist inside. What we agree on as the objective reality is really just shared, repeatable information from 2 or more subjective points of view. So it turns out that these same mechanisms are at work not just regarding our perception of our environment, but also they dictate how we perceive our own consciousness and the consciousness of others. So the Cartesian model of consciousness is, the one that's largely kind of out there. It's observer independent. I think, therefore I am. According to this view, consciousness is individualistic, solipsistic, and really only accessible to itself. It also turns out to be static and objectively extant. So in the same way that, it's in total conflict with the universal model that incorporates quantum mechanics. Okay. So in the book Others in Mind, The Social Origins of Self-Consciousness, Philippe Rochat offers an updated version of consciousness that is both interactive and recursive, in which human cognition is fundamentally social in nature, right? So here we have Allie and Bob. So in Rochat's view, each person learns to be aware of themselves by other people being aware of them. In this way, we are all constrained toward self-consciousness by each other, finding ourselves reflected as in a mirror through language and nonverbal communication, right? The self in this case is not unitary and separate, but rather occurs in a mutual mental modeling of relationships which continue even when the person is alone. In this way, we all spread ourselves out among many other people and are simulated in all of their brains at various levels. So each of us have a different set. Also, like in addition to this, we all have a different self for different social contexts and different cohorts. So in this view of consciousness, there can never be a single objectively true self. Instead, the self exists in between and in all of these various constructs. All of which is to say is that the core task of being human then, and one that happens largely without conscious effort, is concerned with the ordinary function of maintaining one's own identity as well as the identity of others. And you see this, like, the best sort of example of this is insane people and people who have dementia. They don't have correct mental modeling. And this is how we know that they're insane. So this means, in a very real way, that you maintain my identity, and I maintain your identity. And whatever I imagine you are or could be is what you ultimately become, and vice versa. So we quite literally create each other inside a simulated reality dictated by mutual agreement. So if both our physical and psychological realities are dictated through a process of mutual agreement, right? So both our physical reality and our psychological reality is dictated by a process of mutual agreement. Why does the world we live in look like this instead of this? Or this? It's because of this. We don't actually believe something is possible until we perceive it for ourselves through our senses, which I've already said are totally terrible. So what VR represents to me and to us, I think, and to probably some of you, is an opportunity to revolutionize this cycle where by offering new sensory information to promote new beliefs, to lead to new potential, new action, and new results, and in an ever-increasing upward spiral, allowing us to recreate the world and each other. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, we have. Like, I know that was a ton in a really short period of time. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah. She said, if we're judging ourselves by how others perceive us,
then will our judgments of ourselves be affected by our interactions with artificial intelligence? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. We don't have a choice in the matter. She said that seems potentially dangerous because there are people generating AIs that dictate how you perceive yourself. But like I'll say that's already happening, right? Like something like there are tools like Facebook and these other sort of ways that other ways of structured human interaction that promote certain behaviors over others just naturally, and they do so sort of unconsciously, and so that's already happening. That sort of AI is like in existence and out there, and messing with us every day. Can we talk about any projects we've done that have specifically approached some of these philosophies?
Well,
I mean, the surrogate was sort of.
I feel like it was sort of weird, like my talk into his talk, but I think that's kind of what we were trying to say, is that like we're still at the beginning of like manifesting what this is, and I guess the surrogate would be that the closest thing so far.
Yeah. So in that, you wake up in the consciousness of a woman who's experienced a nervous breakdown due to overexposure to layered realities, and it's somewhat based on the work of Temple Grandin, who's was the woman who revolutionized slaughterhouses, and through the use of like compression garments on animals to calm them down, and so the idea of restriction as a tool for soothing and for comfort. As this character, you wake up in the walls behind your own house. You live inside the walls of your own house, and you watch your husband live out your life together via a surrogate that you've both hired. And so that was one that sort of, it's sort of like scratching the surface. And again, it's like these ideas aren't, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a playbook, but it's a foundation with which to build a playbook.
I also want to just shout out to Peter Flaherty and Logan Brown, who worked on that with us. And also, we were Marshmallow Laser Feast. I think we wanted to talk about them. There's a great VR company I think is starting to do work in this area with Marshmallow Laser Feast. They're doing the thing where you can see as the animals.
Yeah. It was a piece that was at Sundance, and you could sort of see data visually represented the way that an insect or a bird or some other animal would, and it's just sort of getting to that idea of that information that's out there is being heavily filtered. You can't really necessarily lean on what you see as the sort of totality of the real world.
Cool. Thank you.
I think that's it. Thanks, guys. Come find us.
Come visit us in Koreatown sometime. Okay.